So we're going to start chapter 25, which goes into a little bit more detail about the Great Depression. We started talking about it the other day when we watched that video clip, and when we finished up chapter 24, we're going to go into more detail about it today. So when the stock market crashed, the president was shocked. No one knew this was coming. They were all spending more money than they had. They were spending, using credit to buy stuff. And when the stock market crashed, people were shocked. They had no idea. Before 1924, the unemployment rate was 4%, which is pretty low. Within 1 year, it'd gone up to 9%. So the amount of people that didn't have jobs more than doubled in just 1 year. So that's going to cause like a chain reaction. As sales of their products decreased, businesses had to lay off more of their workers. So when people started losing their jobs, they had less money to spend. Since they had less money to spend, they were going to places less often to buy stuff. And then those places started to struggle, started to suffer, and they had to lay off even more of their workers. The Ford Motor Company had to cut 44% of its workers. So they laid off almost half of their workers because the problems kept getting worse and worse. And the more people they lay off, the worse this effect is going to be, because now they're going to have even less money to spend. By 1931, the unemployment rate was 16%, so it is 4 times higher than it was just 2 years ago. 8 million Americans could not find work, and people were using their life savings to try to stay alive, and they're running out of money. That's going to run out. So President Hoover encouraged the American people to be patient. He says the depression will end with time. Just wait, you'll be good. So imagine you're struggling and can't make ends meet, can't pay your bills, and someone says, just wait, you'll be fine. That's not what you want to hear. President Hoover did not feel it was the federal government's responsibility to help the unemployed. He said the state and local government should do it. And he said if people really need help, they should go to charities. So Hoover also says that America is strong because people take responsibility for their own lives. So basically what he's telling these people is if you are struggling, it's probably your fault, so you need to fix it. Now, in some cases, people were struggling because of mistakes they had made, but all these people getting laid off had done nothing wrong. They wanted to work. So Hoover had only been president for less than a year, but people blame him for the Depression. They make jokes about him, and these basic homeless villages, people living in the middle of parks, building houses out of garbage, out of, leftover stuff they can take out of dumpsters, start to pop up, and they are called Hoovervilles. So Hoover is catching all the blame for this. Even though it wasn't his fault entirely, he did nothing to fix it. So a couple of things caused the Depression. The stock market crash is one of them. Businesses had also grown too rapidly, and they had made more products than they needed. So they see that everything is going great. So every month they're doubling the amount of products they're making. So they have all this supply, and eventually that's going to cause problems. So imagine you own a restaurant and you're selling pizza, and you sell pizza by the slice. And the first day you sell all the pizza you make, in 10 minutes. So the next day you're going to make more pizza. Let's say you double it and you sell all the pizza you make in 2 hours. And then the next day you quadruple it. When you keep doing that, eventually you're going to be making tons of pizza. But then imagine nobody has money. What happens to all that pizza? You have to figure out a way to get rid of it. And if you wait too long, it's going to go bad. So you either have to drop your prices or you're going to take a big loss on that. And a similar thing happened to these factories because they had done something called overproduction, where they made more than they needed. And making more than they need is bad for a couple of reasons. The factories are going to lose money, and they're going to have to lay off their workers, because if they have a huge supply of inventory already, they don't need workers making more. When the economy was good, people were spending tons of money. They were spending more money than they had, buying stuff on credit. And buying stuff on credit is fine if you can pay for it. But if you can't pay for it, there's consequences for that. So what happens? If you can't pay for things you buy on credit, usually those things get repoed. Now, a lot of these banks started to struggle too. We saw that in the clip yesterday. What happened is the banks had given out way too many loans, way more loans than they should have. And people weren't paying these loans back now. They had lost their jobs. And when people rushed to the banks to get their money out, the banks collapsed. Another thing that contributed to the Great Depression was many countries were still struggling after World War I, and they weren't buying as much American product as they had in the past. Okay, so this next big thing is called the Dust Bowl, and I want to show you a video clip about that in a second. After World War I, farmers were struggling to make enough money. So what happened is they had to keep lowering the prices for their crops if they wanted to sell it. And if you lower your prices, your profit goes down. And what that means is you have to make more to make up for your profit going down. So a lot of these farmers had planted their crops over and over and over again. And they basically had exhausted their farming soil. Because if you keep growing something in the same soil year after year, that soil is going to become worthless. What happens is the soil is dried out. It's basically like sand now. And a windstorm starts. And this windstorm causes this giant dust storm. The wind picks up all the dust and it blocks out the sun for days and days at a time. It's basically like a dust blizzard. So this causes many of these farmers to leave and causes a huge struggle for them. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a video clip about that, and then we'll get back to the lesson.
1934. Darkness falls across America. The worst environmental disaster in American history. Dust storms hit New York, Chicago, and Boston. In Manhattan, the streetlights come on at midday. A monstrous dust storm 1,800 miles wide, from the Great Plains to the Atlantic Ocean. The air turns to earth. The storm carries 3 tons of dust for every American alive. Ships stop off the eastern seaboard, not sure what is happening. The cloud reminds the captain of the ship, the Deutschland, of the sands of the Sahara blowing out to sea. But now, the clouds are devouring the Statue of Liberty. Dust storms were born out of a 100 million acre dead zone, 2,000 miles away in Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and Colorado. The Great Plains had once been the most fertile grasslands on Earth. The topsoil was 6 feet deep, but it has been plowed up and used up by 4 generations of farmers. Now, the sun has dried it up.
What really did the farmers in was an environmental cataclysm that involved an extended drought, high winds, and the loss of millions and millions of tons of topsoil. It was almost as though the heavens themselves had turned against the farmers.
By 1930, the rains virtually stopped. The lighter organic matter, the best soil, is literally gone with the wind. The tiny particles of soil are suspended in the air. Then a freakish phenomenon happens. Static electricity builds between the earth and the dust. Like a magnet, the static electricity sucks up more and more dust, feeding itself, growing in size and power. A monster is created. The dust is lifted up to 10,000 feet. Powered by high-altitude winds, the monster rips across the country looking for prey. April 14th, 1935, Lamar, Colorado. Louise Walton once a Broadway dancer and an actress. She gives up the glamour to breathe the clean, dry air of the prairies. The doctors say her lungs need it. Louise thrives on the southern plains, and so did her 6-year-old daughter, Jean. Until recently. Their rural dream has become a nightmare. 49 dust storms in the last 3 months. But today, the air is crisp and clear. Jean has just got out of hospital with respiratory problems because of the dust storms. Early that morning, 600 miles north, a cold front from Canada had hit a warm, high-pressure front. Perfect conditions to create the winds for a dust storm. But this is not just any duster. By the time it passes Bismarck, North Dakota, it's the biggest, strongest dust storm ever seen in America. The cold front drives the storm south across the prairies. It's heading straight for Louise and Jean's place at 65 miles per hour. It grows more and more powerful, produces enough static electricity to power New York City. By the time the storm reaches Lamar, Colorado, it is 200 miles wide. The temperature plunges. 2:40 p.m. Jean finds herself looking into the heart of the storm.
Jamie? It was like I was caught in a whirlpool. All of a sudden, it got completely dark. I couldn't see a thing.
The dust clouds contain over 300,000 tons of Great Plains topsoil. People tie themselves to ropes before going to a barn just a few hundred feet away. Cattle die, and when they are cut open, their stomachs are full of sand.
There are these memories of people that go for days and days and days, holed up inside of their little ranch houses, and they never see the light of day because the dust is so severe and it's so thick, over hundreds of miles. For days, they don't see light.
The tiny dust particles drill into the child's lungs. She comes down with dust pneumonia, the brown plague. The Red Cross set up 6 emergency hospitals in Kansas, Colorado, and Texas to deal with the rise of respiratory infections. Louise Walton had come to Colorado for the air. And now, doctors tell her that her little girl could die of it.
Okay. So, during the Depression, a lot of American people lost confidence in themselves and in their countries. They could no longer take care of their families, nobody was helping them, and they were struggling. People lived in fear of the future, and businesses were afraid to make investments. They see all these other businesses going out, struggling, going bankrupt, and they're afraid to spend money because they don't know what's going to happen to them. Unemployed workers also started to become hopeless. They would go looking for jobs day after day after day, and after weeks of looking for a job, if you can't find one, eventually you're just going to say, I give up. Families were standing in bread lines for free food. Homeless people were sleeping in the subways and in the parks and wherever they could find. Men who used to work jobs every day were seen out on the street selling whatever they had. So it is looking pretty bad for the country. As the economy declined, it doesn't affect everybody evenly, though. At many factories, the African American workers got fired first or laid off first. Also, women would get fired or laid off before men. So you can see this doesn't affect everybody evenly. So when the layoffs started, the white men basically got to keep their jobs the longest. The African American men who moved from the south to the north to take these factory jobs, they're going to lose their jobs, and a lot of women are going to lose their jobs too, because the factory owners basically think they have a husband at home to take care of them, so they don't need the job. It's going to cause lots of problems, and we're going to see how the Great Depression continues to grow before it finally turns around. Okay, guys, so I'm going to take it easy on you today. We just got one worksheet. It is going to be chapter 25, lesson 1.